So I made a coffee table with epoxy, and I believe this is a maple root slab, but I don't know. I got it at a yard sale. It had a lot of rot in it. Had to carve all that away. Then I realized that it was too big for the intended space, so came up with this circle idea and had a bunch of different layouts in mind. There's Linda. She kept enjoying stealing blocks of wood from me. So yeah, I started filming this after someone wanted to see the process, so I missed a lot of the earlier steps. But yeah, but there I am using an air compressor to get rid of dust and dirt from deep in the cracks before moving on to the next steps, which would be involving using the same deep pour epoxy to seal the slabs. Helps prevent the colored epoxy from staining the wood. So this is the mold that I made, just out of melamine and a landscape border. Filling in with caulk. Yeah, I'll later apply a mold release so that the slab, once the epoxy cures, it will easily come away from the mold. And so this is my first epoxy table I'm making. I learned all this from a guy on YouTube called Blacktail Studios. Super educational, saved me years and thousands of dollars for this process. Yeah. So here I am using the same deep pour epoxy. Had to pour it at the correct ratio, thoroughly mix it, and then just kind of painting basically the slabs with it. It also helps pull out a lot of the gas, the air, I guess gas inside the wood, helps bring it all out. And most importantly, prevents the staining of the wood from the colored epoxy. And it has to sit for about 12 to 18 hours. And that's kind of like the perfect window, because then it's still tacky enough that there's going to be a chemical bond when I do the actual deep pour with the white epoxy. I think I used about 5 gallons. So yeah, I got the pigment dye, had to count how many drops I put in. And yeah, it took a couple of sessions of putting in more dye and consulting with my wife to make sure we're at the right amount of color. Still not quite right there. So you can see how shiny or wet looking those slabs are. That's the seal still kind of at that perfect tacky level. It was very sticky. So those blocks covered in that Tyvek tape, those are going to help keep the slabs in place. Otherwise, once I start pouring the epoxy, they'll just start floating. So I was very anxious at this part. Just wasn't sure if I was going to start having leaks. Would the epoxy even cure right? But thankfully, everything worked out. You see all those bubbles in the epoxy. I'll come by with a blowtorch later to pop those, and continue to have to do that about every 45 minutes or so. And then I'm brushing the sides of the slabs there. Supposedly that helps with limiting the amount of bubbles that form on the sides of the slabs. So I had to keep pouring epoxy as it continued to level out and spread out through the mold. And then I had to keep it at the right temperature. So here I am. I had already started working on the base for the table before I started filming, so there's a lot of steps that were not captured on video. But I did it all with a table saw and my miter saw, so it was pretty rough. Definitely not perfect, but good enough for me. But I had to kind of plane it with that router and router sled, and unfortunately it jumped and cut a pretty big chunk out of it. So right there I am having to cut out some more cherry to fill it. But thankfully it's going to be the part that's actually supporting the tabletop, so you're never going to see it in the final product. So I wasn't stressing about getting it too perfect, but I saw it as an opportunity to get better and try to fix it. So once I had it all glued back together, started sanding it, getting it ready. I think I sanded it to about 150 grit. So I did dowels for the base. I really wanted to not have any screws showing. And I thought it came out pretty good. I made some other furniture with dowels before and had a lot of learning experiences with that, like trying to do too many dowels for one connection piece. So I really brought that number down and made it a lot more simple. So yeah, the legs, it was one big stick of cherry, and I was able to strip them down to these sizes and cut them. You can see on my right hand the piece that I had to fix. Still pretty obvious there, but again, that's going to be hidden under the tabletop. So after about 3 weeks of letting the epoxy cured, it was time to pull it out of the mold. And the epoxy was super sharp, and I ended up cutting my hand, that's why I'm wearing gloves here. But I had to just kind of jump frog these two wooden chocks all the way around the table to release it. And so that's going to be the bottom of the tabletop. So my officer at work, he has a pretty big wood shop at home, including that CNC machine. And he was kind enough to let me bring it over, and we were able to flatten it. And then I brought the table back home, and having to think back to my high school geometry, I was able to figure out the exact center of the table. And I had made the mold intentionally larger than anticipated so that I could have a couple of practice runs cutting it out like this to have minimal chip out and to practice doing a chamfer cut, which would be an angle cut, which will be shown later. I didn't have my attachment for my vacuum to the router, so I just made a huge mess. So then moving on to the final cut for it, cutting it down to size. And that's doing the chamfer cut right there. So I made a huge mess, but it's pretty satisfying to clean up. And then the sanding begins. So I mentioned before chip out, And so the CNC machine, it is great at flattening the table, but it also causes a lot of chip out. And so what I had to do was sand to about 120 grit, and then take tabletop epoxy and CA glue and go back and fill all those chip outs. Some of them I had to make the holes a little bit bigger so that the CA glue could actually pour into it. Right before this shot, I was doing the round over bit with an 1/8 inch bit, and I really like that touch. So yeah, here I am filling in all those chip outs, and this took hours. And there were some parts where I decided to just paint the whole section with the epoxy. Yeah, like right here. Got a pretty funny concentration face, I must admit. So after that tabletop epoxy dries, it's then no longer flat. So I have to go back and level those out. And the best way to do it is to sand the spots so the epoxy warms up, and then it's just a much cleaner scrape. Doesn't add additional chip outs when you scrape it. So I made that glove with Velcro so my hand wouldn't cramp when I'm sanding. Then a little tease of what it would look like, just water right there to clean all the dust off. So yeah, now getting the CA glue with an activator to fill in the even smaller chip outs. And then the CA glue I was able to just sand down. So then I sanded it to about 180, I think was the final sanding. I'm still doing more. You can see how quickly that CA glue dries. So you're now sanding it to 180. And then getting the legs ready, I drilled the holes through so that I could push the bit through to mark where I need to drill here. Then doing inserted threads so that I can remove the base if I want later on, if I want to remake it, because it's definitely not a perfect base. So having that option is nice. So then now I'm doing Rubio Monocoat. I believe it's a wax base coat to help protect it. Putting that on all sides of it before I permanently attach, or not permanently, but officially attach the legs to it. It's very satisfying. So I'm spreading it around, and then I got to buff it in. Then you have to try to wipe off pretty much as you can. So now trying to find a good stain for the cherry, and I'm not crazy with the color that actually came out. I chose the second from the right here, and it seemed lighter right there, and kind of like it more matched the maple and the tabletop. But after painting the whole thing with it and wiping it off, it felt like it was too dark. So again, I'm glad I'm doing the threaded inserts so that I could change out the table legs in the future if I want. But it's not the end of the world. I think it still looks pretty good. And so when I'm attaching these, I'm not tightening them down all the way. It's still snug, but I want it to be able to accept any movement in the wood. But yeah, there it is. Not wobbling. I was pretty pumped about that. A quick close-up shot. So now putting on another finish coat. And then at the time I didn't have it, but I later got a ceramic coat, which I finished the table with. And so yeah, this is it. My first epoxy table. My buddy Robbie's a photographer, and he was able to take these photos for me. He was kind enough to do it. I'm going to make him a table next. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I definitely learned a lot. This table is not perfect, but I'm excited to do it again and try to get better and see what other ideas I can come up with. There it is.